But first of all, from my point of view, I just wanted to reiterate some of the trends we're seeing in the market and the way people are thinking about BIM, and also then we'll finish up right at the very end with some of the forward-looking statements and how we see things shifting over the next little while. And this is something I've been banging on about for a while, that BIM is much more than the design tools, it's much more than a design team. People have been naturally looking at BIM as the outputs of that design coordination phase, because that's really the low-hanging fruit. That's where people start in their BIM journey. They end up moving beyond that, but they start off there. And the problem that they have at that point is that all of that data that's being produced by the design team is very disconnected from the rest of the project team, and that's 90% of the project community is not the design team. And you've also got all the other information on the project that is disconnected from that model data. And when you come to a common data environment and people start talking about PAS 1192 and common data environments, a common data environment really is all of the information on the project. It's not just the model data that comes out of it. And people, we've been saying also that it's not about the file, it's about the data. So all of these things are feeding into all of this data becoming one set that you treat on a project, and you start interrelating that information together. So, sorry, that's echoing things up. So some of the problems that people have got when they start dealing with disconnected data sets and disconnected people is you start having these decisions start being slowed down. They're not as fast as they could be. So RFIs aren't as fast as they could be because the context of the model is actually lost from the RFI process because they're held in different systems. You've also got increased risk of errors because what people are doing is they're manually transcribing information from one system to another. They're entering it as it leaves and they're entering as it receives, and you end up with 2 versions of the truth or 20 versions of the truth on a project. And you've got these incomplete data sets, so making sure that they're merged together, not necessarily merged together, but they're able to talk to each other with open standards. So kind of the outcomes out of this to make sure that it's, we can move to the next level and we can evolve, is people have to keep in mind that it's much more than the model. It's it's the data inside the model, and B, it's all of the other information that a project generates. All of the defects, all of the questions and answers, all of the design workflows and outcomes. All of those things are part of the common data environment on a BIM project. Using open standards means that these tools and these systems can talk to each other in a common way, and you can actually get this information from one place to another place without losing intelligence and without losing context, importantly. And having it in the cloud in a common data environment is also important because it's not just about having all of your models in one place. It's about having all of your information in one place. And so moving beyond document control and moving beyond model management internally is about taking these models, putting them into this common data environment in the cloud so that everyone can access them, not just the design team, and you start interrelating all of that information on the project. It means that you get the best information to hand over to the client at the end, but you also get the best context for resolving issues during the design phase. Imagine being able to do an RFI in the context of a model and send that RFI to someone and they can instantly see the full context of what you're trying to describe to them in the 3D environment with all the properties of the model, resolve it, move on, and that information be linked up to that object or space, whatever it might be inside the model. So that's kind of how we see the industry evolving beyond the first step, which is a necessary first step about moving to these great design tools, moving into the environment of managing the entire data set on the entire project community. So on that, enough from me. I'll hand over now to Aleks from Hacer. Aleks is the senior design manager at Hacer, and he's got some very interesting insights to share with us all.
Thank you, Rob. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, thank you, Rob and the Aconex team once again. I feel fortunate and privileged to be here in front of everyone to present to you a few examples and case studies where some of the things that Rob discussed I'm hoping to put into context and to illustrate to you how some of these things are being implemented at the moment in our organisation. So the purpose of my presentation is to complement his workflows presentation and to demonstrate to everyone how it's possible to cut project waste in general. A brief overview of the presentation. I'll give you a bit of a backstory. For the last, just to set the tone a little bit, as a design manager for the last couple of years, I have been assisting Aconex in developing the connected BIM tool, just providing them with feedback and also giving us the opportunity to be able to use the tool as it's being developed by Aconex. And credit must be given to the Aconex team for actually developing it so quickly, because I remember about 2 or 3 years ago when Rob presented here with some of the opportunities that I could see how the models could be used through Aconex. They're pretty much available now, and they've been available for quite some time. So, so the presentation is quite visual. It's not very technical. I'm hoping just to give you lots of examples, lots of stories and experiences, hopefully that you can relate to. The rest of the overview is pretty much self-explanatory. I'll talk briefly about the organisation I represent, something about myself, the current role, and the main crux of the discussion will be talking about project waste, some examples, and giving you a perspective from a designer's point of view and from a contractor's point of view. And in the end, we'll have some closing comments. And in terms of questions, I'll hand over back to Rob next, and then we'll probably take questions, both of us at the same time at the end of the session. So a bit of background about the organisation I represent. Hacer Group is a Tier 2 contractor with 200 employees approximately. And we've got a $250 million turnover. I'm not sure if a lot of you are familiar with it, but we're a growing company. We're getting a lot more presence with some projects that are happening very close to the inner city suburbs, I suppose. The sectors we service are multi-residential, retail, aged care, commercial offices, and we also dabble in a bit of health and pharmaceuticals as well. So, a little bit about myself, my qualifications. I've got a degree in architecture. I'm actually a registered architect. As I like to sometimes say, I'm a recovering architect. That also gives me the excuse to wear funky glasses and actually I didn't button my shirt all the way up to the top to make myself look like an architect. But yeah, a lot of people pick on me for that. But I am passionate about design, and one of the things that a lot of people don't realise, that I actually also have a qualification in construction management and economics. I spent a fair bit of time at university, so I did 2 degrees, and that's what I've loved about the role that I'm in. It kind of combines both the best of both worlds in terms of dealing with construction and design, how the design can be delivered into construction. So my current role is a senior design manager. I think that was covered in the introduction. And previous experience, this is just a bit of a snapshot of the projects that I've worked with, starting probably from that's probably the most recent one. If you sort of work backwards, that was the project that I worked in Canberra in the late 90s. In terms of experience, I've worked as an architect, I've worked as a design manager, I've worked in the role as a contract administrator, I've even done time as a quantity surveyor, and pretty much an all-rounder, effectively. So I've seen the world from all sort of different sides. In terms of interests and passions, there are probably too many to mention, but I am passionate about environmentalism, sustainability. One pet hate of mine is seeing waste, too much waste in any sense. Time, money, resources, whatever it might be, materials. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I don't want to overwhelm you. I was thinking of actually presenting some statistics before about how much waste we generate in terms of time and in every single context, but I just wanted to sort of set the tone again in terms of why do we need to reduce waste on projects. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me that we all find ourselves having to do more with less resources, having to do more with less time available. So the only way, that's a necessity for us to actually be able to reduce waste. Hence the reason for having to do continuing improvement of ourselves, and how can we make our jobs easier. One of the mottos that I have in my role is actually to make my role obsolete as a design manager, and through the use of BIM, I find that I can perform my role a lot more easily and be able to do my job quicker. And eventually I'm trying to find ways by which I can continue to improve my role, so eventually will become obsolete. And rest assured, I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow. It probably won't happen the role of a design manager probably will hang around for the next 20 or 30 years. But even after that point, another role will probably fill that space. So let's dive into it with some examples of how project waste can be reduced from a design or consultant's point of view. I've got a couple of slides here on the screen for you which shows, sorry, I'm just trying to find, the slide on the left is just a screenshot from Navisworks showing just a simple stair in an atrium where you can see the architectural model overlapped over the structural model, which when I first saw this image, I actually realized that there was a bit of waste there because two different groups had modeled the same thing twice. So there's a bit of doubling up of models. And that was one opportunity where I could find that rather than actually building everything twice, why not people talk to each other and say, look, give the structural engineers a little bit of time to generate a structural model so then you can insert it or overlay it into the architectural model. So that's one opportunity to be able to do that. On the right is a couple of slides where actually the models have been used in the correct sense, where the latest architectural model was used to generate energy or some sort of thermal performance model by the ESD engineer for the project. But on many occasions, I have seen the models being totally regenerated by engineers. Sometimes the actual shape of the model or the shape of the building looks nothing like the actual architectural model. And so not only they had to waste the time to regenerate the model, but also they didn't get it quite right in terms of getting it, making sure that you get an accurate result from the final report that you generate. So in this case, that represents a bit of doubling up, which was done previously, and now in this case, actually, engineers being able to use the architectural models. A couple of other examples I can think of, and I don't have slides here because they're probably a little bit hard to represent, but the other ways that you can cut waste on projects is for the quantity surveyors to be able to extract quantities from accurately built models at the press of a button. I remember, again, when I used to work as a quantity surveyor, back in the days when you had to go over hard copy drawings with a scale ruler and colour in all the drawings to make sure that you've covered everything. These days, if the models are done accurately, that process can be reduced probably to by 90%, if not higher. Another example that I can think of is same for building surveyors. Common argument I have with building surveyors these days is about providing them with hard copies of drawings so they can stamp to be able to issue a building permit when construction starts. Being able to do that electronically through a model would eliminate the process of someone actually having to stamp 4 sets of drawings. And just the thought of it, when I think about it, someone at the building surveyor's office literally sitting there and stamping probably 1,000 drawings with a manual stamp, just does my head in, to be honest, when you can actually do it electronically. So another example of what Rob mentioned before is the ways that markups and RFIs can be sent. The two slides that I've got here on the screen is the one on the left is the way things were done in the past. And actually that's an example from a project that I worked on between 2010 and 2013, the Monash University New Horizons project, where the company that I was with for the first time employed BIM. And this was a way, it's literally a printout of an RFI that I sent to the architects, which involved printing out a 2D plan, hand markups, a printout of a 3D view of the model, again with hand markups, scanning it, saving it, attaching it to an RFI in Aconex. 5 or 6 step process that normally would have taken about 15 minutes. Through the connected BIM tool, you can literally do it through the interface on Aconex, where you actually can see the model, highlight an object, which is that window that's highlighted in yellow there, circle it and put a note there, literally by the press of the button here next. I actually didn't do it in this case because the architect would have been very confused me asking a question about the window. It would have gone through as a real RFI. It actually opens up an RFI and off it goes. So again, that's only a 2-step process that probably would take no longer than 2 minutes. Another way of reducing waste. This is another example of showing how 2D drawings can be used the traditional way versus the interrogation of a model to be able to find out what information you need. On the left, again, is a traditional way of documenting a project. These are 2 out of 300 drawings on a $65 million project, where the architects have generated a massive amounts of drawings. But when you look at it closely enough, there's probably only a couple of the drawings that actually show the information you need with some codes and dimensions, in this case, especially here too. But the rest of the drawing is actually, is of no use. When I first noticed these drawings, I asked, so where's the codes? How do I know what type of wall that is? And the response I was given by the architects was, we have a policy of drawing things only once. So to look for the model, so to look for the wall type, you have to go to the floor plans. So I literally said to them, look, there was probably no need to generate this drawing. Like, in fact, what would have been more helpful is to give us a model so we can interrogate the model by clicking on objects, give us the priorities, and then being able to find that code in the specification, which was literally a PDF file, and doing a Control F command. The way I used to do this at the time of that project was to have the specification saved on my desktop so I can open the PDF and do a quick search for that function. But effectively, it's a lot of these drawings that were produced by the architects, some of them, you can see there was a lot of work and detail that went into them, but in some cases they were drawing elevations of blank plasterboard walls. I don't mean to be critical, but I think we all know what a blank plasterboard wall looks like in elevation, so there's probably no need to generate that. So again, I'm trying to say that it can reduce the amount of work you have to do. It can make your job easier. So that's how things were done then. This is the latest. Again, 2 screen grabs out of the Aconex BIM, connected BIM module, where it shows, again, highlighting an object through the model and gives you the properties of that object. And also it allows you to attach other documents that already exist in the document register in Aconex. Again, it cuts down the process, so you don't have to interrogate things for long periods of time by using 2D or traditional old-fashioned documentation. Some of the other things that we also implement at Hacer is actually, and probably more so than other tools from Aconex, is actually the workflows when it comes to reviewing shop drawings. So the next step for us will be to actually be able to review models using the workflow process through Aconex. And again, through Open BIM, it just opens up the collaboration between all the different stakeholders who are taking part on the project. The one last comment that I just was going to make about just simply the model stack and the ability to overlay the models over each other to be able to coordinate and find where the issues were. Just as recently as last week on a project that we're working on at the moment, we had an issue of drawings that was due yesterday by the design team. The architects were supposed to issue what was commonly referred to as the frozen architectural CAD backgrounds to the rest of the team to be able to catch up with the rest of the design. There was a bit of toing and froing because the comments I got from the architects were, the model, there's still some stuff that's not quite right in the model, we don't want to issue it. So I literally had to put my foot down and say to them, look, we have to draw the line somewhere. I know that there's not going to be everything that's going to be resolved in there, but we have to issue something to be able to let the other guys catch up. So with those sort of arguments will be avoided just by the fact that if you let people update their latest models in the stack, that overlaying of models will be continuous, and it will be an ongoing process where the coordination issues are resolved. So all those sort of arguments will be resolved. I think everyone gets a little bit nervous when they have to release information to others and the models are not 100%. This kind of frees up their hands to be able to just say, yep, we know it's not right, and this is why we're doing it, to be able to fix these things. So where to from here? I think this is the one that the slide was on 2 lines. Mobility. The use of mobile apps which are already present in the marketplace, such as the Aconex app, the Field mobile app, plus BIMX. Only just, again, last week I realized that you can download models through Aconex using the BIMX app and be able to view it on touch technology or smartphones or tablets. Also, the BIM 360 suite of apps. And once we perfect that, and I can speak of a couple of great examples of how beneficial the mobility aspects of the technology are from a contractor's point of view, where it can improve on the quality that you deliver on site, because to start with, you always have access to the latest documentation by making it available through the Aconex app, and also being able to track defects throughout the process from an early phase on site. Just by that, you're also reducing the waste or rework that you have to do continuously on construction sites. Where things could lead from here, new technologies like augmented reality, again using augmented reality on construction sites, holographic models, and 3D printing. I don't want to take too much wind out of Rob's presentation. I think he'll probably touch on that after I finish. So a few closing comments to, as a message that I want you to take away from here today, is that it's not meant to be easy. This is why we're all here, trying to find a better way to do our jobs. You won't believe, for the number of successful or good news stories that I have in terms of using BIM, I can probably match that same number with bad news stories where people still tell me that they would rather look at 2D drawings rather than looking at a 3D model, where people would rather look at 4,000 shop drawings rather than looking at a 3D model. There's a number of different scenarios that I can put to you, but I don't want to sort of, let's not focus on the negative. Let's focus more on the positive. So take the first step and show initiative. Offer and ask your clients, ask your boss, talk to your architect, talk to your fellow subcontractors if you're intending to use BIM, if they'd be interested in using BIM on the project. You must have a plan and know everyone's objectives. Bill mentioned earlier that one of the key questions that he asked his subcontractors was that if he asked for anything, what sort of impact would that have on people? It's always important to ask that, and you tell them what you're trying to achieve from the process. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. As I like to say, don't promise the world and deliver an atlas. Take baby steps. Start with small goals to try and then work your way up from there. I think the main reason why people are negative about BIM these days is probably most of them are people who have had some experience with it in the past and they've been bitten by it, and now they're sort of totally reluctant to know anything about it. And I think that's probably because they tried to reach too far but didn't quite get there. And lastly, always look for ways by which you continue to improve and innovate to infinity and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. So just one more slide, just on where we think BIM is heading. There's probably three key areas that we're talking about. One is around mobility and augmented reality. So just like with BIM in a browser, it's easy to kind of get a little bit of the way there. It's easy to load models in the browser, but it's really difficult to get large data sets performing well in a browser environment. And the same applies to mobile. It's easy to get mobile BIM working to a degree, but to get it to the point that the industry expects and the industry needs is a much more difficult problem than people first expect. So that's kind of where people need to expend a lot of energy to kind of crack that nut, if you like. And then overlaying augmented reality on that, which is where you've got, I think people get what that is, where you're looking through the camera, you're looking at real life and you're overlaying elements from the model on top of that. And people have got that working to a degree, but it's not to the kind of the accuracy and reliability that you'd need to actually go ahead and drill a hole in the wall based upon what the thing is telling you through the device. So getting that to the point that's actually really usable and really part of everyone's kind of day-to-day life is going to be critical there. And then there's COBie. So COBie is part of PAS 1192. So if any of you have been following PAS 1192, level 2 in particular, which is the level of compliance that the UK government is mandating for 2016. So a lot of companies around the world, a lot of projects around the world are starting to kind of set that as their minimum benchmark of what they want to achieve. And one of the key things that standard or that level of compliance calls for is this COBie drop, which is really an Excel drop out of the model, which contains all your asset data. And to us, I think that's not an end game. That's actually probably a fairly agricultural step point for people to go through. But to us, we think COBie in that format, COBie drops of a file, is probably bad is the wrong way to use it to describe it, but it's not the end game because two things. One is it's a file, it's not data, and it's coming out in a spreadsheet, which is a pretty dumb format. We think that what's going to happen in the future when people want to extract data out, especially asset data out of a model, that will be API-driven XML data streams. It won't be some kind of file export to an Excel spreadsheet that you download and upload. That's fairly agricultural, and I think while that's probably a necessary step for people to get through the next evolution of BIM in their journey, it's going to be something that, if we go forward 5 years, COBie in the Excel spreadsheet format may be a thing of the past that we'll look back on fondly and laugh. And the last one is around validation and delivery. So we've already got lots of tools out there that are doing kind of great validation around certain elements of a project, certain elements of models. But what we see is the next thing that's coming up, and there's an MVD standard that's being developed at the moment, a model view definition that's being developed, and that will allow project teams to define programmatically for a given contract. This is the contract we're working to, and this is the stages that we have on our projects. You'll be able to define what is complete and what is accurate for that contract and for that stage, so that when people deliver their models into this common data environment, programmatically that will be checked, and you'll be able to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down or an amber telling you how complete and how accurate your model is, which is great for both the person providing the model, because they know that they can get paid, they've done their work, and it's great for the person receiving it because they know that all the bits that are supposed to be in there are in there and they're as accurate as they need to be. Especially owners. Owners can then take their models with lots of comfort that they can then run their asset without finding 2 years down the track that something's missing or something's wrong. So they're the kind of trends we see as coming up over the next little while. We're kind of interested in how that all plays out. As far as the mobile stuff goes, by the way, we've got our mobile app on display out at our stand out there. So if you want to go and have a play with that and see how that performs and behaves, we'd love to see you to our stand. But Alex, if you want to come up, I think we're open for questions now if anybody wants to throw any questions our way. One at the back there.
Ryan Renahan from GHD. Just a question in regard to IFC earlier on and using the IFC model directly during the construction process with the contractor interrogating the model for different bits of information. Do you find in regard to people handing across models, one of the big challenges we have with BIM authoring applications at the moment is that it gives out everything and it's not necessarily selective. And thus, we're giving out probably a whole lot of information that's pretty dodgy and we don't want to give out, or we want to give out specific information. How has that been addressed in the projects you've been on to date?
I presume the question's directed at me, so I know I've encountered that issue and I didn't touch on that during my presentation. The first project that I worked on, when we first did the clash detection report, there was like huge amount. Everyone freaked out. Phone calls started everywhere. There was like just a flurry of emails. The way I've managed to overcome that is just tell our guys on site that the model is work in progress. Don't build off the model. We're still building off the 2D drawings. So I'm hoping that one day we can build off the model in the future. But for the time being, the work is still happening on the model. So if you see a mistake, don't pick up the phone and abuse the architect or the engineer, because if you do that, I've found this in the past, they won't give you the model anymore. And I think that's more detrimental to the process. So effectively, it's an internal communication within the contracting business to make sure that that's known to everyone so they don't actually start sort of causing havoc. But at some point, the model will have to sort of be finished and no more updates to it, especially once the documentation is completed. So yeah, it's just a matter of having a plan and how you manage the process.
Just a couple of things came to mind as you were talking about that. First of all, you spoke about IFC, and IFC is something that we've seen move a long way in the last couple of years. The people's attitude to it has changed a lot. It had a very bad rep and we were kind of saying IFC is not the problem. It's often the thing that translates to IFC as a problem. Having said that, IFC did have some limitations, and those limitations are becoming overcome more and more as time goes on. There's a new IFC standard coming out which has more fidelity to it, more configurability to it. They're also dealing in the next iteration with infrastructure projects which have typically had, IFC has had trouble with, long linear assets, and they're being overcome as well. So IFC is evolving, and that's a good thing. But another thing about taking a model into a common data environment, something that the PAS 1192 Level 2 standard talks to is work in progress versus ready for construction model data. And that's something that is important, because just putting up a model and saying, here it is, doesn't address exactly the concern you've got about this is just some data that we've got. Or two things. One is you want to be able to control access to subsets of data, not just, do you have access or not have access? And then the second thing is moving things from a work in progress status through to an approved, this is now ready for you guys to consume model. But there's certainly a kind of a need in the industry to not rely necessarily upon, contractually at least, on the model, but rely upon the 2D outputs of those. That will evolve, and eventually people will get to the point where they're doing layouts and construction off the models. But for now, I think lots of people are using the model for design and then outputting the 2D sheets for, tender and construction purposes.
I suppose there's a couple of different mechanisms, as Rob mentioned. That's one of them, the one that I mentioned before. Also, one of the ways that we find that looking at Navisworks models helps, because I think that's just a stripped down version of the Revit model, much smaller file. And to be honest, like even if it's in Revit format, the people who are using it on site, if they are looking at the Revit model, which I'd be totally against, are actually not very comfortable with the idea of a contractor being able to open up a Revit file because you could potentially change things. Probably a lot of the information that's in there they wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. So, but Navisworks is another good tool to use.